Hello guys. Tonight's story isn't about emperors or conquests. It's not about maps or dynasties or the proud spines of stone that snake across mountaintops. Tonight is about calluses, about boiled millet in a broken bowl, about a man too tired to dream, lying on packed dirt under a frostbitten sky. Because history doesn't build itself, and the Great Wall of China, vast, jagged, stretching like a scar across the earth, wasn't born of strategy. It was built with backs and sweat and silence. So before you drift off, give this video a like if it earns it, and subscribe if stories like this speak to you. Now get comfortable, dim the lights, let your eyes grow heavy, because tonight we're walking along the shadow of the wall, through wind-beaten watchtowers and forgotten camps, following 1,000 nameless footsteps into a world that was never meant to be remembered. And at the heart of it all, not the generals, not the emperors, but the builders, the ones who held up the empire, brick by brick, breath by breath. Welcome to the lives buried beneath the wall. Imagine waking before the sun, not to the sound of birds or bells, but to a soldier's boot nudging your side. The sky's black, the ground is cold, and your breath hangs in the air like smoke. You've slept on gravel. Again. Your blanket is thin hemp. Your bed, just dust and straw. You stretch, but it hurts. Not the good kind of ache. The kind that has settled into your bones, permanent, like damp in a cellar. There's no breakfast, not yet. First, the march. You lift your body slowly, groaning quietly. Sound means little here, and sympathy even less. You fall into step with hundreds of others. Some barely boys, others grey at the temples. Everyone walks, no one talks. The trail curves uphill, winding like a ribbon of dust through a craggy mountain pass. The morning wind is sharp, cutting through your threadbare tunic, stinging your eyes. You carry bricks on your back, in a sling of rope across your chest. Each one a small weight, but they add up. They always do. You are told to be grateful for the chance to serve the empire, to protect your homeland. But your homeland is far away, and the empire feels less like a cause and more like a wall itself, one that keeps your life inside something small and grey. The work begins as the mist lifts. First, tamping the earth over and over, beating it with wooden tools until it hardens beneath the formwork. Then lifting bricks, placing them, smoothing mortar with hands that no longer feel the cold. You do not build the whole wall. You build one small part, over and over. A line of bricks, a bucket of mortar. A blow from the overseer's stick if you pause too long, or speak too loudly, or look the wrong way. The rhythm is relentless, but it dulls the mind. And in that dullness, there's a strange kind of peace, like the way your ears ring after a thunderclap. Lunch is a bowl of boiled millet, if you're lucky. No oil, no salt, just grain and hot water. If you're very lucky, a sliver of radish. If you're unlucky, the bowl is cracked, the millet burned, and the overseer is watching. The hours pass in chunks. Morning sun to midday heat. Midday heat to long, leaning shadows. Always the same. Always the same. When the sun sets, the mountain cools fast. The wind returns. You retreat to a camp. A crude arrangement of tents, dugouts, and lean-tos, all patched with whatever cloth or bark could be found. Fires are lit. Not for warmth. There's too little wood. Just enough to cook. Maybe. You sit with the others, chewing your millet slowly, feeling the grit in your teeth. smoke stings your eyes. Sometimes someone hums a song from home. But usually, there is silence. There are no pillows, no soft places. You sleep in your clothes, curled against a rock or someone's shoulder. And the stars, they're beautiful. Cold, clear, endless. 1,000 lights watching you sleep. But they do not comfort you. They remind you how far you are from anything that matters. Somewhere back in the capital, they call this glorious labor. They speak of defense, of honor, of unification. But you know something else. You know the wall isn't made of stone. It's made of people, of days just like this, stacked on top of each other, until they become something too heavy to carry. They say his name was Lu Cheng. Not a hero, not a soldier, just another name on a ledger, halfway through a long column of conscripted laborers. He was thin, sharp-faced and quick with his hands, a carpenter's apprentice before the summons came. No one asked where he came from, and he didn't say. Lu Cheng worked like the others. He tamped earth, carried bricks, ate millet, slept on dirt, and for a while he faded into the rhythm. But then, one morning, he was gone. No fight, no noise, no missing clothes or scattered footprints, just his bowl still cracked, and his bedroll undisturbed. It was as though the mountain had swallowed him whole. The overseers scoured the slope. Dogs were brought in, then horses. Nothing, not a print, not a whisper, just mist and pine needles, and a silence so deep it made the skin crawl. That night, the whispers began. The laborers whispered in low voices, careful not to be overheard. Some said Lu Cheng had found a hidden trail, known only to the deer, that he had followed it into the woods and kept going until the mountain no longer remembered his name. Others said something older took him. Not wolves, not men, but something older. You see, the mountains where this stretch of wall rose were considered cursed by the locals. Before the empire came, these slopes were avoided. The trees were thick with moss, the air heavy with silence. Even birds, they said, flew around the ridge. There were stories of spirits who walked upright like men, but had no faces, of whispers that mimicked your name, drawing you deeper into the dark, of ghosts, not the souls of the dead, but of lives never lived, possibilities lost to the wall. And so, around the campfires, Lu Cheng's disappearance became something more than a missing man. He became a story, a flicker in the dark, proof that escape might be possible, or that it was never really an option at all. The next day, the overseers changed. Not their faces, their moods. No longer bored or half-hearted, they now moved with sharpness, their tempers brittle. The desertion had insulted them. In the Empire's eyes, one runaway could crack the whole foundation of discipline. So the hunt began. 10 soldiers were sent up the ridge. Each carried a short bow, a blade, and a week's worth of dried grain. They disappeared into the pines just as Lu Cheng had, but not with hope, with orders. One came back. He was scratched, wide-eyed, and said nothing. Not a single word. The commander didn't press him, just sent more. This time 20. They built fires on the slope every night for a week, called out Lu Cheng's name, listened for movement. Nothing came back but the wind. Some thought he had fallen, slipped on the rocks, broken his leg, then his breath. Others were less sure. They swore they'd seen lights moving in the trees. Not fire, something colder. A blue shimmer, a flicker at the edge of sleep. And always, always that strange silence. After the second search party failed, something changed in the camp. Work slowed. Eyes darted toward the tree line more often. No one sat near the edge of the clearing anymore. Even seasoned guards kept their backs to the firelight. They began to refer to that part of the forest with euphemisms: the shadowed ridge, the quiet slope. They didn't say Lu Cheng's name out loud. One night, a laborer woke screaming. He claimed he'd seen a figure standing just beyond the trees, watching, motionless. The overseers beat him for disturbing the camp, but the next night, another man reported the same. And the night after that, someone vanished, just like Lu Cheng. No sound, no footprints, just absence. They never found his body. From then on, the superstition became law. Silent, unwritten, but obeyed. No one wandered from camp alone. No one mentioned escape. And at dusk, offerings began to appear: millet, coins, even teeth. Left at the forest's edge. Not for Lu Cheng, but for whatever took him. Years passed. The camp moved. The wall stretched further. New faces arrived. Old ones faded. But the story lingered. Then, one summer afternoon, during a repair to an older section of the wall, a laborer struck something odd. A brick, not unusual at first glance, but as he cleaned off the dirt, he found something carved into its underside. Rough, hurried strokes, not elegant like a stonemason's mark, but deliberate, personal. One character, then another, Lu Cheng, not in the formal script of court records, but in the simple, everyday hand of a village schoolroom. Who had carved it? When? Why? Had Lu Cheng left it behind before he vanished? A quiet rebellion etched into the very wall he was meant to serve? Or had someone else, someone who missed him or admired him, made sure his name wouldn't be swallowed whole? No one knew. The overseer took the brick and threw it down the cliff, but the men remembered. A few copied the characters with a finger in the dirt, practiced them at night by firelight. And for a little while, Lu Cheng lived again, in whispered stories, and in hands tracing his name like prayer. By the end of the century, Lu Cheng was no longer a name. He was a presence. Tales of a man in a faded worker's tunic walking the ridgeline at dusk became common. Some said he appeared only to those who were close to breaking, that he'd stand, motionless, just beyond reach, not calling out, not threatening, simply watching. Others whispered that he'd offer a way out, that if you followed him, he would lead you into the trees, through the mountain, to freedom. But no one who followed him ever returned. In one province, he became a warning, a ghost who lured deserters to their deaths. In another, he became a protector, a spirit who helped laborers endure, who took the weak before they could suffer worse. And in one tiny village, nestled against a crumbled section of the old wall, they still leave a bowl of millet beneath the trees every winter. No salt, no oil, just hot grain and respect. Because sometimes history forgets the rulers, but it remembers the haunted. And in the misty forests where the wall once cut like a blade through the land, they still say his name. The year was uncertain, somewhere in the early decades of the Qin dynasty, when the emperor's vision of unification demanded more than laws. It demanded stone and silence. Among the thousands conscripted to the wall's construction was a man named Lu Cheng. He didn't arrive with fanfare. No one recorded his village, though the sound of his accent suggested somewhere inland. perhaps near the Yellow River. A carpenter's apprentice, some said. Others guessed a farmer's son, caught in a tax draft and marched westward. In truth, his past mattered little. Not here. What defined Lu Cheng was the quiet way he moved. He worked hard, avoided trouble, and spoke only when spoken to. He shared his cracked bowl without hesitation, always saving the biggest mouthful of millet for the man beside him. His hands were clever. He could fix a broken cartwheel with a sliver of pine wood, mend a fraying sandal with reeds. But he never showed off. At night, he stared at the stars for long stretches. Some thought he was remembering something. Others thought he saw things the rest didn't. Then came the morning he was gone. The labourers awoke to frost on their eyebrows, the usual grumble of aching limbs and cold hands. But when they counted off for the day's march, Lu Cheng's place was empty. No warning, no noise, no missing clothes or signs of a struggle. His things remained untouched. His tattered bed mat, the hemp cloak he always folded just so, the wooden comb tied with thread from a red sash. Even his cracked bowl sat where he left it, turned upside down like always, to keep the dust out. They searched. The overseers shouted. Soldiers with dogs swept the slopes. But the pines stood still, unmoved. The trail bent as usual. No blood, no drag marks, not even a smudge of displaced gravel. And so began the whisper. Soft at first, muttered over shared rations or between work shifts. He's not dead. He escaped. He walked into the forest and the trees took him in. Others said the opposite. He was taken. Something waits out there. Something that doesn't leave tracks. By sunset, a new kind of silence took root in the camp, thicker than usual, heavy, like mist that never lifts. And that night, not a single man slept near the tree line. After Lu Cheng vanished, the mountains changed, not in shape, but in feeling. The trees seemed taller, the nights colder. The wind no longer whispered, it watched. The soldiers doubled patrols. Torches lined the paths. Dogs barked at nothing. Still, nothing was found. No sign of Lu Cheng. No trail, no remains. Just the same silence, the same slope, as if the forest had erased him. Then, others began to talk. One man said he saw a figure standing in the mist. Still, tall, facing downhill. Too far to call to, too close to ignore. He turned his head, just for a moment. When he looked back, it was gone. Another swore he heard a voice. Software, not frightening. A voice that said his name, from the dark. Soon stories spread. Some believed Lu Cheng had escaped the wall, that he lived in the forest now, built a hut from branches, drank from streams, watched from the trees while others toiled. Others said he never left, that the mountain took him, that his spirit walked the ridge, half man, half shadow. Not everyone believed, but no one walked alone after dark. The ridge became sacred, or cursed. Food offerings appeared at its base, a bowl of millet, a folded cloth, a stone wrapped in thread. Not for luck, for peace. To keep Lu Cheng watching, but not coming closer. Years passed, camps moved, but the story remained. Some called him a ghost, others a guardian. Some said he was still alive, old now, but free. And near one village, long after the wall stopped growing, an old man pointed to the ridge and whispered, "He's still up there, watching." And every winter, they still leave a bowl beneath the trees. Hot grain, no oil, no salt, just a quiet offering, for the man who walked away. The wall has stood for centuries. Its stones seem silent, heavy, immovable. But beneath them, something stirs. In recent decades, archaeologists returned to the wall, not to measure its length, but to look inside. They didn't bring swords or shovels, just brushes, notebooks, and quiet patience. They dug slowly, layer by layer, dust by dust. And what they found wasn't treasure. It was life, bits of it, tiny, forgotten pieces, pressed into the bones of the earth. A broken tool handle, a piece of sandal, charcoal from a cooking fire that burned 2,000 years ago, and deeper still, a fingerprint pressed into clay, small, likely a young man's, maybe a teenager. It had dried beneath the sun, then somehow survived all this time. The wall is not hollow, but it is layered, compressed with earth, stone, and lime. And between those layers, moments, breath. Proof that someone stood there. Once. The scholars looked closely. Not for gold, not for names, but for presence. And presence they found. It began with a misstep. A graduate student brushing debris from the base of a wall segment near a forgotten mountain outpost paused. She had felt it. Not stone, not clay. Something different beneath her fingertips. She called to her supervisor. They crouched together in the dust, brushed again. There, set deep into the mortar, was something smooth, pale. It was a fragment of bone. Not animal, human. Just a small piece at first, a shard of radius, polished slightly by time. But then another. They stopped using tools, switched to finer brushes, then to air puffs. Slowly, carefully, they uncovered more. A forearm, fragments of ribs, a few teeth, broken but unmistakable. The pieces didn't form a whole skeleton, just enough to suggest someone had been caught or placed inside the wall itself. This wasn't unheard of. Old folk stories had whispered about such things for generations. Builders buried alive to strengthen the structure. Sacrifice, they said, or punishment. But most scholars had long dismissed it as myth. Now the myth breathed again. Tests were run. The bones belonged to a young male, mid-20s perhaps, malnourished. His teeth were worn, not by age, but by grit in his food. Poor millet, dirty water, years of chewing dust. No grave goods, no formal burial. His body had been mixed into the mortar. Accidentally, perhaps, or maybe not. The idea chilled the team. They stood in silence for a long while. No one moved. Above them, the wall loomed, serene, massive, unchanged. But now it felt different. He was inside it, not in memory, not in metaphor, literally. The report was careful, academic. Words like displacement, substructure, and post-depositional disturbance filled the page. But the subtext was clear. Someone had died here. Not in battle, not with honor. Just disappeared into the work. Later, other fragments would be found. Elsewhere along the wall, a femur near a collapsed beacon tower, a cracked skull near a clay mixing site. Always partial, never ceremonially buried. These weren't soldiers. They weren't even meant to be remembered. Just laborers. Men whose names no one carved. Whose bones, by accident or design, became part of the structure itself. The archaeologists never said it out loud, but they began to work more slowly, more gently. Because once you know the wall is full of people, you begin to hear them. Not voices, not ghosts, just something quieter, like breath, caught between stones. Not every discovery was hidden beneath the surface. Some were in plain sight. It started with a brick, rectangular, worn, pulled from a collapsed segment of the wall near a dry plateau where winds howled day and night. At first glance, it looked ordinary, a basic grey-brown unit, shaped by hand, hardened in a pit kiln. But on one edge, just beneath a layer of dust, a line had been scratched. 3 characters, shallow but deliberate. A name. The characters weren't neat. They weren't the formal brushstrokes of an imperial scribe. They were jagged, slanted, pressed with a finger or a sharp twig. Someone had carved their name into the brick before it dried, then set it into the wall. A simple act, quiet, almost invisible. But what it meant was everything. Because this wasn't a builder leaving instructions. It wasn't official. It wasn't allowed. This was personal. Perhaps the man was young, alone. Perhaps he feared he wouldn't make it back home. So he left his name, not for pride, not for fame, but so that some part of him might last. The team found others, short phrases, scratched poems, snatches of folk songs, half-finished lines of verse. One brick read, "I miss the river." Another simply, "Still here." Some bricks bore dates, others drawings, a flower, a handprint, a square, maybe meant to be a house. No 2 were the same, each one a whisper. Historians once saw the Great Wall as a monument to strategy, to military power. But these messages revealed something deeper. The wall wasn't just built by hands. It was built by people with memories, longings, losses, not soldiers, not generals, farmers, bakers, shoemakers, teenagers, fathers, people who sang when they walked, who dreamed of warmth, of rice and garlic, of family. Some etched their names in hope, others in despair. Either way, they spoke to us across time. And the bricks carried their messages quietly, for centuries, beneath storms and snow, until a hand turned one over, and the past looked back. Near a forgotten corner of the wall, buried beneath a landslide of stone and centuries of dust, archaeologists found something faint. It was a dark layer in the soil, thin, almost overlooked, but when they brushed it gently, the smell rose. Old, faint, bitter, ash. A fire had burned here, long ago. Not a forest fire, not a beacon, but something smaller, domestic. Within the layer, they found tiny clues. Bits of blackened millet husks, a charred sliver of bamboo, the outline of what might have once been a bowl, all reduced to powder, but still present. Then came the harder evidence. A pit, shallow, carefully lined with stones, filled not with tools or garbage, but with something more intimate. Hair, clumps of it, curled and dry, preserved by the arid air. Scraps of cloth, woven tight and faded to grey. And bones, small ones, finger bones, rib fragments, a child's jaw, barely grown. This wasn't a grave. It wasn't ceremonial. It was something quieter, something desperate, a secret fire, a hidden burial, perhaps even a final act of care, in a place where care was scarce. The wall is often seen as a fortress, but beneath it, people lived, ate, slept, mourned, and sometimes they grieved in silence, with what little they had. Maybe a child died of cold, or hunger, or fever, and someone, a parent, a brother, a friend, chose to burn the body, rather than leave it to the wind and wolves. There were no markers, no names, just ash, shadows, and the quiet remains of love. Later, near the same site, they found a row of char marks across several stones, not from battle, from cooking fires. This had been a shelter, a camp, not for soldiers, for workers. The kind of place where silence stretched long, where eyes stayed down, where people shared warmth because that was all they had. Even now, centuries later, the ashes speak. Not loudly, not clearly, but enough. Enough to say, we were here. We ate. We cried. We remembered. We lived, even when the wall rose high above our heads. Sometimes, the most fragile things survive the longest. It was during the excavation of a collapsed watchtower, little more than a pile of sun-bleached stones, that a team uncovered something soft beneath the rubble. Not stone, not metal, something woven. They cleared the layers carefully. Dust gave way to compacted clay, and then finally to the shape of a foot covering. A sandal. It had been crafted from reeds, split, twisted, and looped into a sole. The straps were frayed, but still clung to the base. This was not a soldier's boot, not an officer's shoe. It was simple, handmade, meant for movement, not glory. But what drew attention was what lay inside the sole. A stitch, not one used to bind the sandal together, but decorative, small, unnecessary. A single loop of red thread, carefully tied. There was no reason for it, not functional, not assigned, just personal. A mark, perhaps, a signature, or maybe something given by someone far away, a wife, a sister, a child, a charm for safety, or luck, or remembrance. The archaeologist passed it between gloved hands, lightly. Some smiled, others fell quiet, because that single stitch, barely there, told a fuller story than stone ever could. Elsewhere along the wall, more of these human remnants appeared. A comb, carved from wood and worn smooth. A spool of thread, tangled and brittle. Tiny copper needles, likely for mending clothes rather than sewing uniforms. Even a scrap of blue silk, ragged, half buried, but unmistakably fine. None of these items belong to the military. They belong to people, builders, camp followers, maybe even families who lingered at the edges. And with each find, the wall changed. No longer just a structure, but a settlement, a moving village of laborers and overseers, of makeshift lives. People who stitched their sandals in the dark, who braided luck into their laces, and who walked miles each day with dust in their lungs and threadbare hope in their hearts. These things were never meant to last, but they did, because someone took care, someone tied the knot, someone placed it into the world with intent. And now, centuries later, that intent whispers to us, not in words, not in loud stories, but in the quiet curve of a sandal strap and a single red thread. The wall itself is a monument, but inside it are other walls, smaller ones, hidden, layered deep within. When archaeologists cut cross-sections into older segments, especially those built during the early Qin period, they expected competent soil and stone. That's what records described, what everyone assumed. But in some stretches, they found something else. Lined walls, interior barriers, made of bricks, mud, and crushed lime. One set ran parallel to the exterior, just a meter inside. Another was perpendicular, forming a kind of cell or chamber. They weren't for storage. There were no doors, no openings. Once sealed, they remained that way. Why build walls inside a wall? At first, the answer was unclear. Then came the debris. Inside one of these chambers, researchers found scraps, straw, worn fabric, a bent iron ladle. More than anything, it looked lived in. A shelter. Temporary, crude, but real. Someone had built themselves a space, inside the very thing they were building, not official, not planned, just a hidden corner to survive. Later, other chambers appeared. One had char marks from a fire, soot climbing up the inside bricks. Another held bones, not human, but small animal, likely cooked, eaten, discarded. In one, pressed into the wall itself, they found 5 handprints, all different sizes, staggered in height, left behind as if in farewell or defiance. It was clear. Workers had claimed these hollow spaces for rest, for shelter, maybe just to escape the eyes of overseers, if only for a few hours. Imagine that, the wall, so mighty, so vast, filled with hidden rooms, quiet corners where someone boiled millet, where someone sang softly to themselves, where someone slept, wrapped in rags, dreaming of anything but stone. These weren't official quarters, not planned out, not marked on any scroll. They were human choices, simple acts of claiming space, of carving out privacy in a place built on labor and control. No one mentioned these rooms in imperial records, but the bricks remember. The walls hold them still, small sanctuaries, inside something colossal. And even now, buried under centuries, they sit in silence. Rooms without names, doors without hinges, built not to last, and yet they remain. High above the winding spine of the wall, a watchtower once stood. Its walls were thick, cracked now, weathered by centuries of wind and sand. But in its day, it was a vantage point, a post of alertness, eyes fixed outward, watching for enemies, for movement, for trouble. But archaeologists found something inward. While clearing debris from one of these towers, perched on a narrow cliff edge, a worker brushed past what they assumed was a slit for arrows. Then they looked again. The opening was too small, too low, too carefully shaped. Not for archery, not for battle. It was a window, just large enough for a person to kneel beside, just high enough to see the valley below. The inside wall was smooth at that spot, worn by knees maybe, or elbows, and beneath the window they found a bowl, cracked, empty, but there, beside it, a flat stone blackened with soot. No signs of military gear, no scrolls, no weapons, just a space, a window, a view. Someone had sat here, not to guard, but to rest, to breathe, to look out, not for danger, but for peace. What did they see? The far valley, a thin river, hills soft with grass in spring. In winter, snow that blew like ash. And perhaps the road home. It's possible this was never a military post at all. Not really. Maybe a tired man climbed here at dusk, took off his sandals, boiled water for tea he didn't have, and watched the sky turn. Maybe he thought of his mother, or a friend he hadn't seen since conscription. Maybe he watched birds instead of smoke. A single window, carved not for defense, but for remembering. It tells us something important, that even in a place made for war, there was still time for quiet, still space for softness. No one wrote his name. No poem was left behind. Just that window and the bowl beside it, both empty now, but full of memory. In one remote section, where the wall drifts into scrubland and silence, a final segment was found. Short, crumbling, left unfinished, like a sentence no one finished speaking. And there, resting in the shallow pit, where the final bricks were meant to be laid, one solitary block. It hadn't been set. It lay at an angle, half buried, still wrapped in dried earth. Not part of the wall, not yet. It was the last brick, and it told a quiet story. When they cleaned it, they found no marks at first, no carvings, no names. But under the surface, barely visible until the light hit just right. Lines, 3 strokes, then a pause, then a curl. Not a full character, not even a word. Just the beginning of something. A thought interrupted. A mark left halfway. Perhaps the man who made it was called away. Perhaps he meant to finish, but never returned. Maybe it was the start of his name, or a simple message to himself. Even in its incompleteness, the brick spoke. It reminded the team that the wall was never truly finished, that it stretched on, not just across mountains, but through time, through generations of hands. Not one wall, many. Not one builder, thousands. Each adding something, each leaving something behind. A stitch, a song, a scratch, a breath. The last brick was taken in for preservation, stored in a quiet room with low light and careful labels. But in the minds of those who saw it, it still sits on the slope, still waiting, waiting for the hand that never came back, waiting to become part of the wall, or perhaps to mark its end. It is not heavy, but it holds the weight of a life, paused. And maybe that is the most human thing of all. Not triumph, not completion, just the trace, the unfinished line, the mark that says dash dash. I was here. The wall winds like a spine through mountains, forests, and deserts. But scattered along its path are outposts, walled fortresses that house those in charge. And inside one such fortress, the world changed. Here, behind thick stone gates, life followed a different rhythm. Silk robes replaced hemp tunics. Jade ornaments glinted in the firelight. The air smelled not of dust and smoke, but of incense and spiced wine. The governor's residence stood at the heart of the complex. Courtyards opened onto halls. Servants passed silently through covered walkways. Rooms were warmed with charcoal braziers. Walls were hung with scrolls of calligraphy. Not orders, but poetry. Here, meals arrived in lacquered trays. Rice, not millet. Fish, steamed with ginger. Lamb soaked in plum wine. Even pickled bamboo shoots. Crisp, cool, rare. While labourers outside boiled water in dented kettles, the governor dined from porcelain. He drank tea perfumed with chrysanthemum. He watched the wall rise in the distance as something abstract, something managed. From his window, he could see the same workers. Tiny figures carrying bricks, shouting, shivering. But their world did not enter his. His duties were different. Writing reports, stamping documents, receiving messengers, and occasionally hosting. Banquets were rare but not unknown. Officers, inspectors, poets from the capital. They came, and for a night or two, the fortress glowed. Lanterns floated in the air. Music drifted from plucked strings. Laughter echoed through the stone halls. And beyond it all, just past the outer gate, silence. The campfires of the workers, the dirt floors, the coughing, the hunger. A contrast not spoken of, but deeply felt. Because while the wall was built by many, its shadow fell unevenly. Here in the fortress, time moved slower, softer. Letters arrived, books circulated. A man might read poetry by candlelight, while a builder wrapped his feet in rags. It wasn't cruelty, exactly. It was distance, a gap in comfort, in care, in what the empire chose to see, and what it chose to ignore. And within that gap, two lives unfolded, side by side, but never together. Tucked in the eastern wing of the fortress was a chamber few ever entered. No guard stood outside, no labourers swept its floor. This was the bathhouse, built with stone from the same quarry as the wall, but used for a purpose far more delicate. The floor was heated. A system of underground flues ran beneath it, carrying warmth from a furnace just outside. On cold mornings, the tiles would steam gently, a soft mist curling up around silk robes and oiled hair. The bath itself was shallow, round, lined with smooth clay bricks. Hot water was poured in from bronze kettles, scented with crushed petals, dried herbs, sometimes orange peel brought in from the south. This was not a necessity. It was luxury, while the builders outside washed in streams, or not at all. The governor lowered himself into warmth. His attendants stood nearby, silent. One poured water, another held a folded towel. And from the window, misted by steam, the wall was visible in the far distance, a jagged line against the pale sky. Sometimes he read letters while he bathed, or recited poems, eyes half closed. Sometimes he said nothing at all, just sat in silence, breathing in the scent of warmth and forgetting the cold that built his world. When he left, he was dried with linen, perfumed with sandalwood. His clothes, waiting on a carved wooden frame, were always pressed, always warm. Outside, a boy stirred ashes in the furnace, his hands black with soot, his back to the wind. Inside, the governor stepped into comfort, never once thinking of the fire's source. The bathhouse was not grand, but it was private, a space to feel human, to feel clean. And perhaps that is what made it so stark, knowing that beyond the fortress walls, the men whose hands shaped every brick had never touched water like this. Their baths were rain, or snowmelt, or nothing at all. And so, the steam that curled above the governor's head carried with it a quiet truth. Even in water, the empire divided. Every month the couriers came. They arrived on tired horses, cloaks heavy with dust, boots cracked from the long road. But inside their satchels, words flowed like silk, sealed scrolls, stamped orders, and sometimes delicate letters on fine paper, thin as onion skin, tied with ribbon, marked with fragrance. These were not commands. They were poems, questions, hints of home, from wives, from siblings, from friends at court. One governor, we know, kept every letter, stacked neatly in a carved box. He read them aloud at night, not to anyone, just into the stillness of his private chamber. Sometimes they brought news, a birth, a flood, a festival missed. Sometimes they brought silence. Weeks passed without reply, and in those days he sat longer by the window, staring toward the horizon, toward a place no longer reachable. The letters were a lifeline, a thread connecting two worlds, the Empire's center and its edge, because life at the wall, even for the governor, could be lonely, surrounded by soldiers, scribes, guards, but rarely by equals, rarely by warmth. So he poured his thoughts into ink. He wrote of the weather, of frost on the roofs, of the way the crows circled at dusk. He wrote of the men, distant, quiet, worn down, of the wall rising each day like a tide that never recedes. Sometimes he included a poem, short, careful, full of space between the lines. The letters he sent travelled far, weeks over mountains, across rivers swollen with rain, and maybe they were read, or maybe they were tucked into drawers, unopened. But they existed. Paper from the capital, paper from the frontier, bridges made of ink. And though the wall was made of stone, these letters softened it, if only for a moment. They reminded the governor he was not entirely forgotten, that beyond the frost and the silence, a world still waited, a world that spoke his name, gently. It happened rarely, once or twice each season, but when it did, the entire fortress seemed to hold its breath. A banquet, announced days in advance, not for the workers, not for the guards. This was for guests from the capital, inspectors, scholars, sometimes even the sons of nobles, sent to learn the ways of the border. The hall was swept clean. Lanterns were hung from the beams. Their light was warm, flickering, softening the hard lines of stone. Silk runners covered the tables. Brocade cushions were laid out. A bronze incense burner, shaped like a mountain, let smoke rise in curls. Food arrived in silence. Not one bowl at a time, but in waves. Steamed buns filled with minced lamb, pickled plums, roasted duck brushed with honey, chestnuts soaked in rice wine, even shaved ice mixed with sweet syrup. A rare treat brought in blocks from higher altitudes. No one looked hungry here. No one rushed. They ate slowly, methodically. With small bites, light conversation. Poems were recited. Lines exchanged across the table. Call and response, as old as the empire itself. A musician sat in the corner, plucking notes from a guqin. Software low, almost beneath hearing. And outside, the workers boiled millet in dented pots. They crouched around small fires, wrapped in patched cloaks. Their sounds were laughter and coughs. Their music was wind through pine. They did not look toward the fortress. It was not for them. But sometimes a lantern floated too far. Carried by a breeze beyond the gate, its light drifted into the camp like a wandering spirit. And someone would watch it, just for a moment. No bitterness, no anger, just a kind of quiet knowing that on this night, like all nights, the wall between them wasn't made of stone. It was made of comfort, of choice, of everything that could be given, but wasn't. And inside the hall, amid silk and wine and soft music, no one spoke of the men who lifted the stones, but they were there, always, just outside the glow. When the guests were gone and the hall's quiet again, the governor walked slowly to his chamber. It was a small room by palace standards, but still warm, still safe. The walls were thick, lined with clay to keep out cold. The floors were covered with woven mats, padded beneath. A brazier burned low in the corner, its coals giving off a soft red glow. The bed stood in the center, wooden, sturdy, draped in layers of linen and padded quilts, dyed with soft indigo. Beside it, a table. On it, a water basin, a small clay lamp, and a scroll, loosely rolled. Sometimes he read before sleeping. Poems from the Tang, letters from home. Philosophy, if his mind needed quieting. Other times, he simply sat, listening. The fortress had a sound of its own at night. Creaking beams, wind against the outer gate. Sometimes a dog barked, far below. Sometimes, only silence. He thought of many things then. Of his position, his duty, of the road that brought him here far from the green softness of the south. Of his father, who had once stood at a wall like this. Of his son, waiting in the capital. Sometimes he dreamed of leaving, of handing over the seal, of walking out, not as a governor, but as a man. But he never did. Each morning he woke, washed his face in warm water, put on his robe and belt, and stepped back into the machinery of rule. But for those few hours at night, behind a closed door, beneath thick blankets, he was quiet, unwatched, still, and maybe, in those moments, he came closest to the men beyond the gate, both living under the same sky, both with aches in their bones, both wishing for something softer, even if they'd never meet. Sometimes before dawn, the governor rose early. He'd walk quietly, his slippers brushing the stone floor, past the courtyard, past the still-burning lanterns, toward the northern edge of the fortress. There, a small balcony overlooked the slope. It faced the wall, not a symbol, not a map, but the real thing. Dark and jagged in the pale morning light. He would stand there in silence, watching. Below, the builders were already awake. Small fires flickered in the dark. Figures moved slowly, stretching, lifting tools. They looked like insects from up here, ants building something endless. But he knew better. He knew each man had a name, a story, a reason for being there, even if the Empire never recorded it. He watched them carry bricks up the hill, watched the line move, steady as breath. He knew their work. He'd signed the orders, calculated the supply lists, approved the rations. He'd heard the reports of injury, of collapse. He'd seen the records dry and thin. But this was different. Seeing them, real, moving in the chill of morning. He didn't wave, didn't speak. He simply watched. And sometimes, not always, his eyes narrowed, as if trying to remember something. A face, maybe. Or a time when he, too, had lifted stone. But those memories were distant now, wrapped in silk, filtered through scrolls. Still, he watched, until the sun rose higher, until duty called, until the wall faded back into project, policy, plan. But before that, for a brief moment, he simply stood, a man, looking at other men, separated by height, by rank, by comfort, but still breathing the same cold air. And for that small hour, the wall between them felt a little thinner. The wall stood between them. In stone, yes, but more deeply, in life. To the workers, it was the thing that swallowed their days. The mountain they shaped, the ache they carried. Brick by brick they gave themselves to it. They ate beside it, slept in its shadow, bled into its foundation. For them, the wall was real. It pressed into their shoulders. It cracked their hands. It shortened their lives. And yet, they built it. Above, in the fortress, The governor saw it too, but differently. To him, the wall was a diagram, a border, a report filled with figures inked in neat columns. He knew how many sections were completed, how much grain was allotted, where cracks had formed, which watchtowers needed repair. He understood the wall as responsibility, as duty, as history, but not as burden. And yet, sometimes, when the nights grew long and the mountains swallowed the last of the lantern light, the governor felt it, the same thing the workers felt, that the wall was more than stone. It was something the empire had built around itself, a great scar, a spine, a weight, and perhaps it shaped them all. From both sides, the governor with his scrolls, the laborer with his hammer, both bound to something bigger, both trying to hold it up. They would never speak, never share a table, never trade places, but they shared one truth. The wall did not care who touched it, only that it stood. And in that quiet knowledge, the governor sometimes paused, at his window, on the balcony, in the silence between reports. And he watched the wall, and it watched him. So now, the wall stretches behind us. A long ribbon of stone, worn smooth by centuries, silent, massive, unmoving. But you know better now. You've seen what lies beneath it, not just dirt and mortar, but stories, hands, hopes, 1,000 names never written, footsteps never followed, meals eaten in silence, nights spent staring at stars, wondering if the work would ever end. And on the other side, in warm rooms, behind high gates, those who managed the wall, who stamped the orders, who bathed while others built. Their lives were softer, but not weightless. They too stood in the shadow of what they commanded. They too were shaped by what they oversaw. The wall wasn't built by emperors. It was built by choices, by daily tasks, by calloused palms, by the soft scrape of reed sandals across gravel. And though the names are mostly gone, the traces remain, in bricks, in bones, in fingerprints hidden inside clay, in a thread tied to a sandal, in a message carved into a stone, in the quiet that settles after a story is finally told. So now, as your eyes grow heavy, remember the weight of the wall, not just its height. Remember the people it took, and the people who watched them, and let that remembering be gentle, because some history isn't meant to stir us. It's meant to hold us, to rock us slowly until we rest.